weather. We have a lot to get to, beginning this morning with Hurricane Fiona. The Category 4 storm brushing past Bermuda overnight and now taking aim at Canada.
Yeah, let's show you some of the first images from inside Fiona. They come from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This video shows wave heights nearing 50 feet and winds of more than 100 miles an hour. Bermuda is getting the worst of the storm this morning, with heavy rains and high winds pummeling the island. So far, almost 8,000 people are without power there this morning. NBC's Morgan Chesky is in the heart of it this morning.
We are here in St. George's, and I have to tell you, this is the worst we've seen so far for Fiona. Even though it is about 100 miles to the west of us, that wind only picking up, and we're seeing the one thing that officials were concerned about, storm surge, starting to get washed inland to potentially flood low-lying areas.
So Morgan's in Bermuda. Now in Puerto Rico, where Fiona hit earlier this week, they're suffering through an excessive heat wave now. Power is still out for much of the island, with power lines still down. President Biden has authorized 100% federal funding for Puerto Rico's recovery.
So let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Yeah, NBC's Bill Cairns joins us with that. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Great to see you guys. So we got to start with the breaking news first. What we were watching, that area of interest in the Caribbean, is now an official tropical depression. That means the National Hurricane Center in Miami is going to be tracking this, and we are going to be watching this closely because they have it heading towards Florida. That's the bottom line, and they have it heading towards Florida as a hurricane middle of next week. So here's the latest. It's only 35 miles per hour. It's in the middle of the Caribbean. It's heading towards Jamaica in the general direction, and they think it should become a tropical storm by tomorrow, and if it becomes a tropical storm in time before any others do in the Atlantic Basin, this would be called Hermine. So that would be the next name of our storm, the H-name storm after Fiona. Notice the path up towards Jamaica, western Cuba as a Category 2 hurricane, and either a Category 2 bordering on a Category 3 major hurricane on Florida's southwest coast. Notice that cone of uncertainty goes almost over towards the Bahamas, or it goes over almost into the central Gulf. So obviously there's some wiggle room there. So what the bottom line is now is everyone in Florida needs to check on their hurricane supplies. Make sure you have your plan in place in case this storm does head to you in the middle or early portions of next week as a major hurricane, because that is a possibility. So here's a closer view, and we're not going to focus too much on that center line right now because it's going to change in the next couple of days, and a lot will depend on what the storm will do over Cuba. Remember, central Cuba is more mountainous. It would weaken the storm more. If the storm passes to the west of Havana, it's very flat in that portions of Cuba, and the storm will not weaken that much, and that'll be a big determination of how strong it is when it gets closest to Florida. So what are our computer models saying? Well, our American and our European computer models are pretty accurate for 5 days out, both saying somewhere near South Florida by the time we get to Tuesday evening. And as far as our other computer models, you can notice they're all peppering the Florida Peninsula as we go throughout the middle to end of this upcoming week. So if you're from New Orleans towards Texas, still watch this, but it looks like you're going to be avoiding this storm anywhere, I'd say, from Mobile all the way down towards the Keys in Miami. You do have to especially watch this and make sure you have your plans in place. As far as Fiona goes, it's now moving away from Bermuda. They did have 113 mile per hour wind gusts there, and this storm is going to race up towards Nova Scotia tonight. By tomorrow, this storm will be over Cape Breton, and they are going to experience a storm like they never have before. 800 miles wide is how big the tropical storm force winds will be. This is going to be extreme tree damage. All the leaves are on the trees in this area, and some of the highest wind gusts. Here's our forecast for 11 p.m. this evening. 127 mile per hour winds at Sable Island. Right where that storm comes inland there in eastern Nova Scotia, easily gusts from 50 up to 100 miles per hour. The trees are just going to be devastated. Whatever they fall on will be destroyed. Power will be out for probably weeks in these remote areas away from the city centers, but even Halifax will have some pretty strong winds. So guys, Canada and the Maritimes, they have their hands full with a devastating storm tonight and tomorrow. And then here in the U.S., we have to watch this next storm very closely. We likely will have a hurricane, maybe even a major hurricane landfall as we go through the middle of next week.
All right, Bill, we know you and your team will be keeping an eye on it. Thank you so much. Another big story this morning. Voting is underway in 4 regions of Ukraine in so-called referendums on joining Russia. These Kremlin-orchestrated ballots are taking place in the occupied areas of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Those regions make up about 15% of Ukraine's territory. But the votes have been denounced in Kyiv and by the West, calling them illegal and a sham. NBC News senior national correspondent Jay Gray joins us now from Ukraine's capital with more. So, Jay, we understand voting is expected to continue until Tuesday. What more can you tell us about what's happening in those regions right now? And what is the message from Kyiv to people living in those areas?
Yeah, Joe, and right now on the ground, we know that ballots are being delivered door to door in those 4 regions that you talk about, from the east through the south of Ukraine. There are also makeshift poll places that have been established, but most of the voting, they say, will take place from home, and Russian officials say they're very confident in the results of this election. Kyiv here and the President Zelensky saying, again, that this is a sham election with no legal or international standing. And that opinion, of course, echoed by Western leaders, and NATO has said it will not recognize the results as well. President Zelensky also, Joe, going on to say it will not slow down their effort in the counteroffensive.
So, Jay, I mean, many see these votes as a foregone conclusion in favor of annexation, similar to what we saw in Crimea back in 2014. How could it impact the war if Russia then recognizes those regions as part of its own territory? And does it change anything from a Western perspective?
Yeah, and I think it helps to put it in perspective, Joe. These votes were initially scheduled for November, but rushed up as the counteroffensive really went better than anyone thought it would, including Ukraine. And they were able to take back a large section of Zaporizhia. So they decided to move these votes up and try and get something done here. What it would basically do is give the Kremlin the pretext to claim any effort to retake occupied territories would basically be an attack on Russia itself. Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy head of the Russian Security Council, kind of laying that out in this quote. He says the protection of all the territories that have joined will be significantly strengthened by the Russian armed forces. Any Russian weapons, including strategic nuclear weapons and weapons based on new principles, could be used for such protection. And that nuclear threat is something that clearly has the attention of a lot of people in the West. Yesterday, the U.S. saying that NATO's got to come out and say something to stop them from these what they call nuclear threats.
Jay, we're also watching what's actually unfolding inside Russia after President Putin announced that partial military mobilization earlier this week. We understand thousands of men have already been handed draft papers. Others are actually fleeing. What's the latest there?
Well, you saw the initial reaction. It was instant. People pouring into the streets, thousands protesting not only the call up, the mobilization, but also the war itself. And you're right. Russia Defense Ministry says that 10,000 men have just gone and volunteered, not waiting for what they call a subpoena there to serve. We know that all of the flights, one-way flights out of Russia, were booked immediately following this announcement. The roadways heading into Mongolia, Finland, and Georgia packed with people trying to make their exit. We also know from Google that the searches spiked immediately after that announcement on how to leave Russia. That was one of the questions. And another question, Joe, was how to break your own arms. It sounds like from all of that, obviously, there are a lot of people who don't agree with this mobilization and don't want to take part in that. And as a result, you've seen a strong message from here in Kyiv telling Russian soldiers there is a way out. Lay down your weapons. We will take you and take care of you. You will be held until after the war. And at that point, you may not have to return to Russia. So they're trying to seize on what they say is a clear indication that the Russian people don't support this war.
How to break your own arm. My goodness. All right. Jay Gray reporting from Kyiv.
Yeah.
Jay, thank you so much.
All right, turning now to the latest developments on the multiple legal battles facing former President Donald Trump. The special master reviewing those classified documents that were seized during the search at Mar-a-Lago has given Trump 1 week to back up his claims that the FBI had planted evidence while they were inside his Florida estate. Senior national politics editor Jonathan Allen joins us now with the latest on that. Jonathan, good morning to you. So what kind of impact will this deadline have on the case for Trump's legal team that they're trying to argue here?
Good morning. The biggest impact for the Trump legal team is that they're going to have to start making decisions about what it is that they will actually argue in court about whether there were documents planted by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago. Most people don't believe that claim that former President Trump has made. His lawyers have not really been making that in court so far, but they are going to have to make a decision about what is it that they're going to argue happened during the search of Mar-a-Lago. They're going to have to make a decision not only about the documents that were taken, looking through them and identifying perhaps what was taken, but also documents that they think might not have been included in the search. That they're basically going to have to tell the judge what their arguments are. And so that's a preview that we really haven't seen yet.
Yeah, pretty big deal. A lot could come from that. Well, let's turn now to the civil lawsuit the former president is facing here in New York. State Attorney General Letitia James now suing Trump and his family, along with the Trump Organization, alleging a serious case of business fraud. So what does this mean for Trump going forward?
In terms of the business and in terms of his family, I mean, this is certainly more personal than many of the legal investigations into the former president himself. This does involve his family. If Attorney General James is successful in court, what it would mean is that Donald Trump and his children couldn't serve as officers of any business in New York. They would have to pay $250,000 in fines, basically. And so it means a lot to their empire, to their brand, and to their actual wealth. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning here is just the lawsuit itself, brings further damage to that Trump brand as the Trump family tries to do business, whether you're talking about real estate transactions or continuing to further that brand.
And Jonathan, so many headlines still coming out about the former president. Do we know how all this legal uncertainty surrounding him might be hurting or possibly helping his candidacy if he decides to run again for president?
Yeah, our colleague Peter Nicholas and I did some reporting about this the other day. When some of these legal actions were occurring. So what we're hearing from people around Trump is that they believe that this will make him stronger within the Republican Party should he seek another term as president, which most people around him expect that he will do. That basically it has a rally around the flag effect, not only for that hardcore Trump base, but for establishment Republicans who fear that Trump base and want to make sure that they're not on the wrong side of it. So they look at this as a political plus for him, even if it is a legal minus.
The dynamics never cease to be fascinating. All right, Jonathan Allen, thank you.
It has been a record-setting week for migrant crossings along the southern border. And just in this past year alone, more than 2 million have made that often dangerous trek into America. NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley is in El Paso, Texas, one city struggling to deal with the spike.
I'm here in El Paso, Texas, along the border with Juarez, Mexico, in what's become the epicenter of the new influx of migrants coming over, many of which are Venezuelan who don't have family members to stay with here in the United States. It's stretching the resources of city officials, and we've been able to hear from city officials as well as federal officials about what they're doing to cope with the influx. Take a listen. We're in El Paso, where city officials say their resources are being pushed to the brink by a record number of migrants, averaging over 1,500 illegal border crossings a day in this area. Migrants sleeping on the streets. Now the city's Democratic mayor taking a page from some Republican governors, sending more than 3,400 migrants on daily buses to cities like New York and Chicago.
We had a huge increase. When you have a huge increase, then you need to continue to adapt.
Though unlike the Republican governors, he's giving cities notice. Are you getting enough support from the Biden administration?
I've been over to Washington and I've been able to talk to them. And no, the biggest thing we need is decompression.
While Republicans blame President Biden's policies, a tough administration border border official is blaming Congress.
Congress really needs to take action, but I think people across the country should know that it's not chaos here.
But with Border Patrol and local shelters over capacity, immigration officials here have released nearly 1,300 migrants onto the street in the past 2 weeks. We witnessed roughly 100 being dropped off by the city at a nearby hotel. We met Jenny, who told us she has no money, nothing to eat, and nothing to wear besides the clothes on her back. She is one of so many Venezuelans without family or sponsors to take them in. And we came across these migrants with Border Patrol just after crossing from Mexico.
Who's from Venezuela? Venezuela.
Many residents telling us the border crisis has become too much to handle.
How do you feel about your mayor sending them on buses to those cities?
Well, kind of sad because I don't know what else he can do, because he can only handle so much.
As you heard, many residents here in El Paso do have compassion for these migrants, but they support their mayor's decision to send them to other destinations. He doesn't see it as a political statement like those Republican governors, but a humanitarian mission, helping these people, many of them Venezuelans who don't have a family member or a sponsor in the United States, get to another city for free where they can hopefully use those cities' resources to find a better future. And we've also spoken to border officials who say in recent weeks they've seen as many as 600 migrants gathered together here on the border. And officials are worried those numbers could grow.
All right, Julia, thank you so much.
Well, it's been a week now since a boil order notice was lifted in Jackson, Mississippi. Now there are new concerns after residents filed a lawsuit saying they still don't trust the water. NBC News correspondent Zincle Asimwa spoke with Jackson's mayor and has the latest on the ongoing water crisis.
Hey there. Well, while it's been over a week since the boil water advisory was lifted right here in Jackson, Mississippi, residents still say they're not going to drink the water.
Cassandra Welchin is a lifelong Jackson, Mississippi resident.
I wouldn't drink the water because, we don't trust it.
Welchin, a social worker and mom of 3, says she's worried for her kids' health.
What impact do you feel this water crisis is having on your kids specifically?
With Zaya, who has a disability, right, it has been very difficult for her to comprehend, in some ways, don't drink the water, don't use the water. And she began to have, upset stomach.
And she's not alone in her concern. A group of Jackson residents filing a class action lawsuit alleging the water crisis caused various health problems like malnutrition and lead poisoning. The lawsuit against the city of Jackson, 2 private engineering companies, and Mississippi officials, including Jackson's mayor, Chokwe Lumumba.
What's your response to the hundreds of Jackson families who say their water is not safe or has faced lead contamination?
The issues of insecurity in the water, the challenges with that water has been well documented. We have warned them when those circumstances exist. Now, with respect to the lawsuit itself, I won't litigate that.
Do you drink it?
I drink it every day. I drink it every day. However, that doesn't mean that I don't understand the insecurity of our residents when they're being told to boil their water each and every day.
Lumumba says the city's ongoing water challenges are partially due to a lack of investment in Jackson.
Without significant capital improvements, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when these challenges will arise again.
This, as Governor Reeves on Friday sparked controversy over these remarks.
As always, a great day to not be in Jackson.
The mayor adding that state leadership must invest more resources into the predominantly black city of Jackson to benefit residents like Welchin.
This just did not start this year. It's been going on for a very long time.
And as that mother you heard from, Cassandra, waits for change to come from the state level and city officials at City Hall right behind me, she's taking matters into her own hands with her group, the Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable. They're supplying laundry services to individuals who say they still don't have clean water, as well as assistance for utility bills. And this really shows the community rallying together as they wait for change to come. Back to you.
Certainly more to come on that, Sinclair. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.